World War II shaped the world we live in and transformed the destiny of mankind altogether. It was one of the most destructive wars of history which impacted millions of lives. In 1945, the Allies won the war. But what if they had fallen instead? What if Germany had won World War II? What would have happened to our society? What would have happened to our world? In this What If in History video, I'm going to discuss the 3 steps that I think would have helped Germany to win. And I'm going to discuss then the ramifications of such a victory for all of us. For me, it's simple. The 3 steps are Battle of Britain in 1940. Germany would have had to win that battle for them to have a chance of winning the war globally. Then they would have needed to win the Battle of Stalingrad in 1941-42. And after that, they would have needed to conquer and colonize the US, probably with their allies, Japan. The truth is the Battle of Britain, where it was bombarded for months, could have made the British collapse. While they didn't, they really came close to it. In that scenario, in that first step for Germany to win World War II, let's say they did. Let's say that Britain fell. Britain would have been soon invaded like France, which had already fallen the same year. Resistance would have formed, but Germany would have shown its cruelty and destroyed any form of resistance, like it did in the rest of Europe. To do so, they would have targeted civilians, making sure that any types of resistance would have been crushed by the fear that civilians would have felt into fighting back. They would have also, I believe, made trade embargoes or creating such a difficult life for the British and the French that they would have eventually collapsed. But also, let's not forget as well that there are some people, not just in France, but also in Britain, though a minority, who believed in some of the ideas of Nazi Germany. Those people would have been collaborators, which would have turned British people against one another. By 1940, I believe that Germany would have been in control of Western Europe. With Italy, they would have probably invaded Spain, Portugal, and it would have been quite a scene. And the Americans would not have been able to help much when they would have been attacked in 1941 in Pearl Harbor, like it happened, by the Japanese. And at the time, I believe that it would have created lots of problems for the US. Germany would have moved its focus towards Russia because they believed that the Slavs, the Russians, the Poles, the Ukrainians, the Serbians were inferior to them. By doing so, and if they had won the Battle of Stalingrad, they would have invaded these countries. Then they would have turned their eyes on the US and helped the Japanese get the US. And it's where, in the TV show The Man in the High Castle, where I believe there would have been a division. What I don't believe, though, is that there would have been a buffer kind of, place where resistance could have emerged. I believe that they would have never done something like that. In the conquest of the US, I really believe that though Germany did not come close to create the atomic bomb, they tried as early as 1938, but they never made it, they would have bombarded the US with the Japanese. It's where I said they would have divided the US. Soon after all these victories, there is no doubt that Germany would have started to spread their ideas of the superiority of the Aryan race. If the Nazis had won all Europe and part of the US, whom I believe they would have shared with Japan, they would have reorganized their conquered territories based on racial hierarchies. Let's also not forget that by winning against the countries in Europe, Germany would have also invaded the colonies of these countries, further oppressing and annihilating African countries. Possible hierarchy based on the Nazi regime and its system of beliefs was: first-class citizens would have been Aryans, honorary Aryans who was granted to Japanese, Western Europeans which were British, French, Dutch and Irish. Then the second-class citizen would have been Mediterranean people. Anything that was Southern Europe, there was tensions already between Italy and Germany, as Hitler believed that Southern Europeans were lazy compared to Northern Europeans. And then anyone else, obviously a third-class citizen or as people that needed to be destroyed. Jewish people, obviously, the Slavs, the Russians, Poles, Serbians, Ukrainians, etc. People of colors, Roma, homosexuals. For these people, if the Germans had won and implemented all their policies, they would have faced incredible genocide. I think around 50 million people would have died if Hitler had won the war. Any type of resistance would have been destroyed. Another thing that would have happened if Hitler had won World War II, the Nazi would have attacked the Catholic Church. They only tolerated the Catholic Church because of their alliance with Italy. But after the war had been won, they would have invaded Italy as well. I really believe that Italy would have been a conquered territory and put an end to the power of the Catholic Church. Well, massacres would have happened, Catholic institutions would have been closed down, and clergymen would have been arrested and executed. Himmler himself said, "We live in an era of the ultimate conflict with Christianity. It is part of the mission of the SS to give the German people the next half-century the non-Christian ideological foundation on which to lead and shape their lives." The Nazis were anti-religion. Christianity would have been therefore replaced with loyalty to the Nazi regime and its beliefs. Now, let's move on to what would have happened between Japan and Germany after things would have slowed down, after the territories were conquered, and after that the people they needed to oppressed and destroyed were gone. Like in the famous show The Man in the High Castle, I believe that eventually there would have been kind of a war between the two countries. Distrust between the two countries would have grown and the tensions would have grown. Hitler would have never stopped wanting to conquer. He really wanted to conquer the whole world. This is, however, a very difficult scenario because obviously the two countries would be facing extreme challenges from the territories they had conquered. So before they could really fight one another, they would have to crush any type of resistance. But resistance is something that is always very hard to crush altogether. There is a map to explain the Man in the High Castle and how the world would have been divided. I believe here that the years would have been divided between the Germans and Japan. But as I said, I'm not sure they would have had kind of a buffer zone, because you don't want to have a place where there's more resistance. I'm also not convinced, as I said before, that Italy would have been giving any territories. I think it would have been conquered by Hitler, because Hitler really believed in the superiority of the Germans over the Italians. So I think though there would have been a war at the end between Japan and Germany, or they would have decided just to respect everyone's territory, and it would have been the Japanese Empire and obviously the German Empire, and they would have traded with each other. But I believe that at some point there would have been riots, rebellions, because no empires ever can only survive. There's always a collapse of empires, what history can tell us. Overall, in this type of alternative history video, we've seen that if Hitler had won, if the Allies had fallen, I think it would have been the beginning of what we would have called as historians the Dark Ages. And I really hope, that people would have fought with all their hearts to overcome and overthrow this horrible regime. I hope you enjoyed this video on what if in history, and I'll see you next time for another video. I'm so grateful for your support. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of this type of videos. Thank you so much for being here. Bye!